Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are once again going to continue with our educational speedrun series. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action with a 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with a bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Night on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey hey, he's smurfing play by play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
Here we go. First game. We get the white pieces, and I'm going to start with the move D4. Now our rating is still only around 900, so we have a long ways to go in terms of getting to games where we reach a middle game or an end game. Still, I think there are going to be a lot of themes that we can teach you. Okay, so we get D4 D5, or sorry, I should say that I can teach you, because of course there is no we. All right, so we get D5 being played, and now let's play the move C4 here. Let me adjust my camera just a little bit. I realized it's a touch off. Let me adjust it a touch. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so here we go. You guys get to see the sausage being made, and we get the move pawn to c5. Now this is a very unique opening. This is what is known as the Austrian variation. I like to call it the box. It's an opening that I actually have played quite a bit in my games. I think at the beginner level it's probably a little bit dubious, because I'm going to take this pawn on d5, and if my opponent doesn't know exactly what to do, it's going to turn into an opening very similar to the center counter or the Scandinavian, where the black queen has to come out very early. You develop these knights and white gets a lot of play. Now my opponent may choose to play knight f6, which is a move that I've actually played in top level competitions, but I really don't think that's logical at this level. So we get the very standard move pawn takes pawn. Now again, when you sack the pawn with c4 here, it's very normal that your opponent thinks, well, why not mirror with c5? The problem of course is after takes I can take on d4, and now the pawn on d5 is guarded, and here I simply have one extra pawn in the middle. Now this is not losing necessarily in this position. I think black still has some ways to fight for equality, but it's very hard to play at the beginner level and survive. Now after the game ends, of course I will show you guys after pawn takes pawn what the best setups are. So we get the move knight to f6. Now my opponent is attacking this pawn on d5 with the knight and the queen. The logical way to approach this position is, how do I develop my pieces? As you'll notice, I have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 pieces on their original squares, so I need to try and develop all these pieces on original squares. I want to develop, but meanwhile my opponent is attacking the pawn on d5. Now I could play the move e4 to build the big white center, but I'm just going to go knight c3 here, because this develops the horse and guards the pawn on d5 at the same time. We get to move bishop to e6, and now I do need to be careful. Now if I were to take the bishop, I would lose the queen. That would be a Botez gambit, which would not be particularly good. On the other hand, I have to figure out, is there a way to guard this pawn? So black is attacking with the bishop, the knight, and the queen. Now I could go queen to a4, checking the king, and after the bishop moves, move my queen away. But again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play e4 now. The pawns guard each other. I've got this nice white center, the one extra pawn, and all these pieces are going to come into the action very, very quickly. Already here, I probably should be winning. Again, at the beginner level, I think my opponent played c5 because it looked like a mirror, and my opponent simply did not have an opening strategy. Unfortunately, this is going to be a very quick game, which I will win in a few moves, I predict. The big issue for my opponent, of course, is that he has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 pieces that are, or 6 pieces I should say, that are on their original squares as well, and my development is going to simply be a lot quicker. When you combine that with the extra pawn in the center of the board, it's all but hopeless. So we got the move knight to c6. Nice move. If I take the knight, then I would lose the queen. Unfortunately, I can simply move my queen away. I'm just going to go to d1. a4 would be okay as well, but the reason I'm going to go to the d1 square here is that generally if your queen gets attacked, unless it's a very specific opening like the Scandinavian, normally you want to retreat the queen backwards. So I'm going to put the queen on d1. I could put it on d2 as well. Problem for my opponent here is that both the bishop and the knight are under attack, and because the queen's no longer hanging, my opponent will lose a piece. Additionally, I feel like when you watch videos or even when you play games as a beginner, one of the most important things is having this feel for where the pieces belong. And I feel like subconsciously in your mind, even if it's not this exact position, if you see games that I play or even in your own games where you move a queen backwards, you drop it back when it's being attacked by a knight, it becomes more intuitive and more standard to play like that, to drop a queen back, and more often than not it is going to be the right choice. Now I didn't mean to do that. I went to grab my queen and it dropped on the square. Whoops. I meant to take the bishop, of course, with my queen. As you can see, I'm looking at my mouse. That was unintended. Okay, well, my opponent allows me to take anyway, so I will take. Now I have 4 minor pieces. My opponent has 2 minor pieces. I'm up 2 pieces here. Only issue is that I have no development, so I'm going to drop my knight back to e3. And the reason I'm going to bring the knight to e3 is that I'm worried about a knight going to b4, d4, and forking the king and the rook here, but my knight covers the square. We get e6. Okay, let's develop our pieces here. If bishop b4, I can simply blockade. Okay, now I'll go bishop c4, attacking this pawn on e6, preparing to castle my king. If I get my king out of the center of the board, the extra pieces will play. So we're going to get a trade here of the bishops. Now I'm up 2 pieces. I can actually castle queenside as well, but I'm just going to follow the basic routine of going kingside. Finish the development. I have 3 minor pieces on the board. My opponent has 1. This should be pretty straightforward. So let's go knight to g4 here. I don't want to hang the knight. Go knight to e5. Again, don't want to hang this horse. We get to move b5, attacking the bishop. I'm simply going to drop this bishop back to if I go to b3, I realize there's knight to e2 check hitting the king, so I'm going to drop the bishop to d3 instead, because I don't want this knight e2 check winning this knight on d2. We get g5, and now what do I want to do? I think, unless I'm missing something, I can just go knight f7 to fork these rooks here. I'm going to pick up one of these rooks. The rest is going to be very basic. Get h4. Let's just take the rook. Let's go knight f3. Try to force more trades. Again, when you have a lot more firepower on the board like I do at the moment with 2 rooks and a bishop in return for a rook, I'm more than happy to trade off, because with a lone rook, your opponent simply can't checkmate a king. So let's just go check. Let's take this pawn. Not even necessary to take. Let's take this pawn. Let's go here. No need to take. I could have, but we'll just take the pawn on g2, move the king back. My opponent has 3 pawns here and a rook. No chance to go for checkmate. All that I need to pay attention to is avoiding a stalemate. Let's go check. I'll bring the knight closer. Okay, my opponent resigns the game. Now, let's talk about this opening for a second. When you play c4, if your opponent is brand new to the game and they don't understand what the logic is behind playing this d4 c4 setup, it's very common that you will see a move like c5. The point is that if black ever tries to take this pawn right at the get-go, you can push this pawn to e3. You can also go to e4. The pawn on c4 becomes a target right away. Now, I'm not going to go into the basics of the queen's gambit accepted, which is pawn takes pawn. When your opponent plays c5 here and you take on d5, probably they're thinking, well, if you take this one, you go e6, you attack this pawn on c5, and it's actually very similar to a queen's gambit accepted with the colors reversed. But here I took on d5, and this, by the way, is the best move. So if you do play an opponent who plays like this, let me adjust my camera just a touch, you guys. I realize I like to sit a little bit further over, so I'm going to adjust this just a touch. When you do go for pawn takes pawn here, if your opponent takes this pawn on d4 after queen takes pawn, you're simply guarding this pawn on d5. So you're up 1 pawn in the center of the board. Now, after pawn takes pawn, the theoretical continuations are either knight to f6, which I have played myself in many top level games against players like Jan Nepomniachtchi and Magnus Carlsen. I do not recommend trying to play this at beginner level. I think it's simply impossible. If you are an intermediate player watching this video and your online rating is, say, around 1900 or 2000, it's maybe worth considering studying this variation. In general, I still wouldn't recommend it, but at least if you're around that level, you can probably play this and make it work. Now, the other move that can be played here, and is a little bit more natural, is queen takes pawn, taking back on d5, so that if white takes on c5 here in this position, black can simply trade the queens and then play this move knight f6. Very quickly, black is going to develop. All of white's pieces are on the original starting squares, and black should be a little bit better. So after queen takes d5, normally what you'll play is you'll play knight to f3 here, guarding this pawn. And now when black takes the pawn, you go knight to c3 here, and both of these knights have been developed right away. If black takes knight, you win the queen in the game, And when black moves the queen to a5 after knight takes d4, knight to f6, there are many ways to play this, but probably what I would recommend at a beginner level or even a lower level intermediate is to play this move bishop to d2 to avoid anything on the diagonal. And after queen to d8, a move like knight b3 followed by g3 and bishop g2. So say black was knight c6, you go g3, bishop g2. Let's just say black plays e6, something like castles, and then rook c1, and you have this nice diagonal for the bishop. You have the rook on the c file, and it's a little bit easier to play for white. Now, do I think this is going to happen at beginner level? Almost never, because I think if somebody plays the move c5 on move 2, it's just because they think you push these pawns. I should mirror it by pushing these 2 pawns forward. But that is the correct theoretical continuation for anybody who's wondering. In case you're an intermediate player watching this video and you do face this opening, you play knight f3, you play knight c3, takes, knight f6, bishop d2, and then you play for g3 and bishop g2 in the next couple of turns to finish your kingside development. All right, so back to the game. We get takes, we get knight f6, I played knight c3, and now we get bishop e6. Now here black can play the move e6, and actually after e4 white is better. I think black can take, and after takes, knight f6, knight c3, white is up a pawn here, but black does have some potential play after bishop d6 and castles very quickly because white has all of these pieces which are underdeveloped. Okay, so my opponent played knight to f6, knight c3, bishop e6, and now after e4, I'm simply protecting the pawns on e4 and d5, and already here, I'm going to be able to develop the bishop, the knight, castle, the king, and at this point, the game is effectively over. So there isn't really a whole lot else to talk about. Actually, the one last thing I wanted to mention with queen d1 is that the reason that I was talking about moving the queen backwards is because there are many openings where that's the case. So one such opening is e4, e5, d4, takes, and knight c6. Now here white can go to e3, d2, or d1, but you never move the queen to a4 here. In the Scandinavian defense, which goes e4, d5, takes, knight c3, sometimes you will put the queen on a5, but it's the only opening in general where you move the queen side to side. And in fact, I actually, having had this position before, I played queen a5, but I've also played queen d6 and queen d8 as well, further proving the point that you sometimes want to keep the queen on the same file. So that was really the last point that I wanted to make about queen d1. Queen to a4 would have been good as well with the pin here. You're still winning a bishop or a knight. But in general, when you guys see moves like queen d1, in your mind subconsciously, the brain should be like, okay, well, that's the move. That's queen should go back. It should go back versus to the side. And more often than not, from a probability standpoint, that's going to be correct. There are situations where going to the side is better, like the Scandinavian, but I would say more often than not, it's better dropping the queen back, either to the home square or going to a square like d2 when you get attacked by a knight coming out early. Okay, so I think that wraps it up for this first game. Let's do a new 10-minute game, and off we go. We have the black pieces. Okay, so we get the move e4. Now I'm gonna play, what do I want to play here? I think I'm gonna play a Sicilian. Caro Kann, as I said, is fine. I think in general of the options here, c5, c6, and e5 are pretty much the 3 moves I'd recommend, and then maybe the Scandinavian. But I don't really like the French, I don't like the modern, and I don't like the Ali Ekins defense with knight to f6. So we get bishop c4. Now I'm going to play the move e6 here to stop any weird threats like a scholar's checkmate here. Bishop has no way to attack this pawn with the pawn in the way. So we got the move d4. Now I'm going to take the pawn. This is actually pretty funny because I'm going to bring my knight out right away, attacking the queen. Kind of funny after the first game that we reached the same situation here, but my opponent correctly drops the queen back. As I was saying, when your opponent brings the queen out early or you bring a queen out early, more often than not, you're going to put the queen back either to like d2 or d1 or d8 or d7. Now I'm going to go knight to f6, attacking this pawn at e4 immediately. No pawn thrust. We get bishop g5. Now this move is interesting. Ordinarily I would try to go for a quick punish, but as this is an educational speedrun series, an educational speedrun video, I'm not going to do what I'd normally do in a regular game. Probably in a normal game I would play a move like queen to a5 or queen b6, but this is about the themes, and I can't take the pawn because of bishop takes queen, and you'll notice there is this pin. Now I've mentioned this quite a few times before already, but I'm going to play the move bishop to e7, and generally speaking, if your opponent gets a pin like this, if you can break the pin by putting a bishop in the way between the knight and the queen here, generally this is the best way to break a pin, is by moving the bishop to stop these threats. So we get bishop b5. Now here I can gladly take the pawn because white cannot take my queen. The bishop is in the way. You can't jump with the bishop to take the queen here. It's not possible. So now after bishop takes bishop, I simply recapture with the queen or the knight. I'm going to take with the queen here, and I'm simply up one pawn in the middle of the board. Now my opponent takes on c6, and this is important because every pawn structure is a little bit different. So in this pawn structure, I'm going to recapture with the b pawn towards the center, and the main reason is now actually queen d4 is a good move, attacking the knight and the pawn, because the goal by capturing towards the center is I want to build a big black center. Now if I were to play d5 here, my opponent captures the pawn on g7, so I'm going to move the knight back, knight's not under attack, and there's no pawn hanging on g7, and now I'm free to start building this big black center with the pawns. Now it's hard to do this during a game, especially without showing a diagrammed illustration here of why I captured towards the center, but all the pawn structures are different because you're probably thinking, well, why not take with this pawn so the bishop gets scope on the diagonal? Now there's nothing wrong with taking with the d pawn, but I would have this pawn in the way of the bishop. So we get h4. I'm going to go e5, attacking the queen again. I'm going to play d5 and probably castles on the next 2 turns. We get queen c4. Now if I were to go d5 here, my opponent will capture this pawn and I would lose the game, so I'm just going to castle first. I probably will play d5 anyway. Main reason I think I'm going to go d5 here is that if white takes this pawn to even out the material, you'll notice here that my opponent has 1 2 3 4 5 pieces on their home squares. White is underdeveloped. So now I'm going to go rook b8, using the open file for the rook. Generally, if you have open files, it's where rooks belong. So I'm targeting this pawn on b2. We get the move b3. And now the question is there a way to attack before my opponent develops these pieces very quickly? All these pieces have not come into the action. So what I'm going to play is I'm going to play the move e4, attacking the queen again. Now I'm trying to push my pawns up the board here before white completes development. Queen g3 is an excellent move here, attacking the rook, but also potentially spying the pawn in front of the king. Now the move that I'm going to play is bishop a6 because the rooks now guard each other. It's also a developing move, but besides being a developing move, with this bishop on a6, the white king can never castle to the king side because it would be going through this critical square where the bishop is covering. So we get h6 here, threatening the checkmate. I push the pawn to avoid the checkmate in 1. This bishop, say white goes knight h3, there's no castles because the bishop covers a square here, so I'm not worried about castles, which means that I'm going to try to rip open the middle of the board before my opponent has time to finish development. So the move that I'm going to play here is I'm going to go d4. I could play e3. That's a pretty strong move. If there's anybody watching who's intermediate and you're wondering about this move, this is also a very good move. Now I'm going to go d4, the point being that white cannot castle the king out of the middle of the board, and e3 and d3 are both incoming here, and as long as white can't get this king out of the middle of the board here, these pawns are going to open up the center, and this king should get checkmated before it can castle and get to safety. So we get knight g5. Here I'm going to play the move e3. There's no attack here. My king side is very safe. All these pawns guard each other, so I'm not really super worried, and I'm just going to try to open up one of these files, either this e file or the d file, before this king can get away. So we get the move f3. Now I don't have an instant way to win here, but I think what I'm going to play is I'm simply going to continue pushing the pawns here. There's no way for white to attack my king. It's very secure here, and I'm just trying to force open these files in the center of the board. Now white could castle theoretically here, but if white were to castle here, I would take the pawn, attacking the knight, and my bishop would attack the rook. Maybe hard to visualize, so I'll show it after the game, but my opponent takes on d3. Let's take the pawn on d3. The rooks are still guarding each other. The king cannot castle, and now we get to move knight c3. Now here I'm going to play the move rook to d8. The main reason I'm going to play this move is simply to overprotect this bishop. I'm also setting up a very nasty trick here. I think my opponent will see it, but maybe not, which is if he castles, that would blunder into checkmate in 1. But also the rook is on this file, so if I move the bishop, this rook will be able to go all the way down to this d2 square where the pawn is guarding the rook. So we get the move rook to d1. Now I'm going to follow through with my plan here. I'm going to drop the bishop back to a6. The king still can't castle, and now I have a very nice open file for my rook. The king is stuck in the middle of the board. You can't castle through the check here, which means that white is close to lost. So we get the move queen to f4. Now this is actually what I would say is a pretty good move for my opponent, because the queen on f4 attacks the knight, attacks the pawn. It also covers this b4 square where my queen could move. So this is an excellent move for my opponent. Excellent move. Now I actually need to be a little bit careful here because my king side is a touch weak. The move that I'm going to play is as I look at this, like I'm guarding the pawns. They seem safe. If white can get these knights very active, I could have trouble. So I'm going to go knight to d5, offering the trade of the knights. I'll pre-move pawn takes knight. And what you'll notice here is that my queen both guards the pawn on f7, but it also stops queen to f6. And at the same time, I now create this threat where I can start pushing the pawns. My opponent plays queen d4, another excellent move here, setting up the lolly checkmate with queen g7 if I were to take the knight. I don't want to allow the checkmate, so the move that I'm going to play is f6. And now this knight has to go somewhere, because after takes, the queen covers the checkmating square. Now the knight can't go to e4, it can't go to e6 here. The knight kind of has to go back to h3. Fortunately for me, white still can't castle. This king is unable to get all the way over here. So with the king unable to get over due to this bishop, the knight's gonna have to go back, and then I can start to play for the open files, and it should be relatively straightforward, although it's not super obvious to me how I win immediately. So we get knight h3. Now I'm going to play rook c8 here, lining up the idea of rook to c1, checkmating this king. Again, the king can't go through the check on f1 here. Also worth pointing out, my opponent's rook and knight are not in the game at all. This is why castling is so important early on, because this rook, with white being unable to castle, this rook can't get to any of these squares because it's stuck with the king in the way. We get queen takes pawn, checking the king. I slide the king over, and now I'm setting up this checkmate with rook to c1. If my opponent could castle here and then bring the rook to any of these files, white would be fine, but with white being unable to castle here, the game is over. I'm threatening both queen to b4 check, but also rook to c1 here. If white moves the king over, there's going to be a rook to d8, collecting this queen on d5. At this point, the game is pretty much finished. Now my opponent might find a way to struggle on for a few more moves. We get queen to d1. Now I have queen to b4, checking the king. King can't go on the light squares due to the bishop. You have to block. Queen takes queen is going to be checkmate here, and that's going to be the end of the game. Now my opponent actually played relatively well in the middle game. I thought I was going to win this game very easily, but my opponent found a couple of tricks that probably would have worked against a certain level of player, so I have to give credit to my opponent for fighting on in this game. Now there are a few things that I'm going to mention after the game ends, so bear with me. Okay, my opponent resigns, and now there are a couple things that I want to point out about this game. So there are a few things that I want to point out about this game. Very specifically, the first thing I want to point out is, again, bringing the knight out right away, forcing the queen back. Queen does go back as expected. We get this pin, which I break. Generally with these pins, where if you take a pawn, you lose the queen. If you can get a bishop in the way of the knight and the queen, that's generally what you prefer. It's the easiest way to break a pin. There are many such examples of this. One of the most obvious ones is in the classic Italian game. Not that you will ever get this in a game, but it's to play something like d6, and if white goes bishop g5, you simply play bishop e7, breaking this pin from the bishop towards the queen. Now it won't always be like this, but generally if you can break this pin with the knight and the queen by sticking the bishop in the way, it's what you should aim for. So let's go forward. I go here, I take, we get takes, and now I took with the b pawn. Now there are many different pawn structures in the game of chess. Now taking with the d pawn, there would be nothing wrong with this move since I'm up a pawn in the center of the board, but generally if you have the opportunity to build a center, and by the way, I also want to clarify one thing here. Center specifically refers to the e file and the d file in the game of chess. This is the center. Everything to the left, say the c file, b file, a file, this is considered the queen side because it's to the I guess for me it's the right of the queen. So basically if it's to the right of this queen, this is the queen side. If it's to this side, the right side of the king, this is the king side. So the center generally refers specifically to the E and D files. So when I talk about the center, it's referring to these files, and more importantly, this is considered a bit of a center. Of course, if you get this as well, this is also a center. The center generally refers to pawns on these two files, and very specifically either these two squares or of course the two corresponding squares for white. Now the reason I took with this pawn is because by taking with this pawn, if I can build the center, it's really reinforced here. Say we get this position, the pawn on c6 guards the pawn on d5, and now I have a lot of grip with these two pawns. Whereas if I were to take the other way, I can still build the center down the road with e5 and maybe f6 for example, but it's much better if you can have pawns on the e and the d file. Additionally, you might be thinking of another opening, which is the Spanish opening, just to show something to you guys, where if you reach this position, black could try to take with the b pawn. It doesn't lose or anything, but the point is when you take with this pawn, you open up this diagonal for the b, whereas if you take with the b pawn on c6, let's say white goes d3, it's very hard to play for d5 to get this big black center because the e5 pawn is always going to be very weak. It is possible, more often than not, you're going to end up with a position like this, and there's nothing wrong with this position, but you can't get the pawns on these two squares because this pawn is always being spied by this horse on f3. So back to the game. we get this position, queen d4, I went knight f6, h4, e5, castles, h5, d5, and then yeah, inevitably I played this move bishop to a6. Important development here because you stop the king from castling. This was very critical. We got this d4, e3, again trying to force it open. I played rook d8, then I played here, takes, queen f4, knight d5. And actually there isn't a whole lot for me to explain, but I did want to point out that pawn structure issue, and also, as you saw, the queen going backwards. And as we saw it in 2 games in a row now, but you will see it more and more as you play more games where there are these options where a queen comes out early, gets attacked, and generally the queen retreats to its home position, or home square, I should say. All right, so we have time for one more game. Let's click on new 10-minute game. This will be the last game that we play for today, and I'm going to play the move d4 once again. So we get the move d5. I'm going to play c4. Of course, you can play the London. There are many different setups like the London or the Trompovsky, many openings. We get the move knight to f6. Now, ordinarily, I would take on d5 and build the big white center. I think my opponent confused the move order, though, and my opponent will play e6 next move. So I'm going to play knight c3 rather than trying to take advantage of this move order from my opponent. We get c6. Okay, this is also fine. This is what is known as the Slav defense, where you put these 2 pawns out on d4 and c4, and black puts the pawns on c6 and d5. Now here, I'm going to play the move. What do I want to play? I think actually I'm going to go for... What do I want to play? I think I'm going to play the move knight to f3. Now, I could play the move e3, but the point is that when I develop this knight here, we'll see if my opponent chooses to take on c4 or not. There's a lot of heavy theory here. This is a beginner video, so I won't get too deep into the weeds of that. But my opponent doesn't take the pawn. We get bishop g4, trying to trade the bishop for the knight. Very logical move, by the way, because if you think about it from a fundamental standpoint, if black were to push this pawn to e6 here, you would have this triangle of pawns, but the bishop would never have any scope on this diagonal. So we get bishop g4. I'm going to play knight to e5, trying to attack the bishop, but maybe also putting pressure in the center of the board on the black pawns and the bishop. Now my opponent plays the move bishop to h5, and this was kind of what I was hoping for, because the bishop is on this diagonal where temporarily the pawn is pinned, but the bishop is very, very far away from the queen side. Now, I'm going to play the move queen to b3 because here I'm right away trying to attack the center and this pawn at the same time. There's a lot of pressure here, and this bishop is no longer on the c8 square to guard this pawn. This bishop would much rather be here to guard the pawn, but it's way offsides on this h5 square. So I'm putting a lot of pressure on these pawns. We get to move queen c7, and now I believe that I can take and get a free pawn here, but even better than the free pawn is to go bishop to f4 as I'm lining up this classic fossil with knight to g6, where I discover the queen and attack this rook in the corner pocket. We get knight d7. This is a blunder. Now I'll go knight g6. The knight guards the bishop from being captured while attacking the rook and the bishop at the same time. Now here already my opponent probably could resign. I don't expect my opponent to resign, but already at this point the game is effectively over. Or is it? Or is it? It actually is not over. My opponent finds the move e5, which is the only move in the position, a move that I completely missed, because now if I take the rook in the corner, black takes the bishop, and here black will get 1 bishop for the rook, and this knight will be out of play for the rest of the game. So I'm just going to drop the knight back to take the pawn. I'll illustrate the exact line of knight h8 after game. Very hard with just some arrows here, so you'll need to see it on the board. I'm going to take with a knight. Now I'm up a pawn. The bishop and the pawn guard the knight if black were to capture. So temporarily, at least, I have an extra pawn here on the board. My opponent trades. I will take back with the bishop attacking the queen. Pawn, of course, guards my bishop from being captured. So here we get to move queen to d7. Now there are many options for me. What I'm going to play here is I'm going to take this knight, and mainly I'm just going to take this knight because this knight is a great defender of the pawn. But additionally, if black takes back with the pawn here, these pawns are stacked on top of each other, and now I'm going to win another pawn, although actually I have a little trick that I'm going to go for. So the knight and the queen both guard this pawn from being captured. I expect my opponent to take back. But with these double pawns here, even though black has the 2 bishops in this position, white is way ahead materially. Again, I'm a little bit slow with the development, but all I need is 1, 2, 3 moves to finish the development. Actually 1, 2 I should say. I can't draw arrows. 1, 2 before I get to castle my king, so it's not that big of an issue. If it were, I would say in general, if you want to think about development, think about it in terms of the amount of moves you have to make. The amount of moves that I have to make in order to castle, it's 1, develop the bishop, castle the king. So it's effectively 2 moves before the castle. I would say as a general rule, if you're in a situation where you need to make 3 or 4 moves developing before castling, and you're already like move 10, you've probably done something wrong, and you really need to pay close attention to getting your completing your development, unless of course you're simply checkmating your opponent. So I'm going to go e3 again. Now I push the pawn. I want to develop this bishop to e2, d3, or c4, and then castle my king and get out of dodge. So for example, say we were, and this is a blunder by my opponent, say we were in this position, right here, and I have a knight on g1. That knight on g1, that means I need 1, 2, 3 before I castle the king. That's a lot of moves that you need here, but in terms of like your opponent not coming up with a plan and being able to do something, which is why I say if you're thinking about development and you're a little bit behind, if it's like 2 moves behind development, like 2 moves very specifically where your opponent's going to get the king out of the center, it's okay. If your opponent has castled the king out of the center, you need 3 or more. Generally, you're probably going to be in some trouble. Now my opponent took the pawn on d5. It's a little bit of a letdown here because now I don't have to develop the bishop to d3 or e2. I can actually go bishop b5, collecting the queen due to the pin. I'm now going to castle my king as well, and the game is effectively over. So my opponent resigns here. Now the important thing about this opening, and I don't think the Slav opening is going to happen a lot at the beginner level, is that when I went knight f3, my opponent obviously could have taken this pawn on c4. Now, if your opponent plays the Slav at the lower beginner level, I don't know if anyone would recommend it, but let's just say your opponent studies the opening for whatever reason. What you should do is play the move a4 here. The main reason being that if you play e3, trying to go after the pawn, very similar to the Queen's Gambit accepted, here black can play b5, and the pawns are guarding each other. The big difference being that when you play c4 on move 2, after takes e3, black has not put this pawn on c6 yet. So if black plays b5 trying to guard the pawn, you go a4. Let's say black plays c6 to guard. After takes queen f3. Whoopsies, you're going to lose this rook or the knight on this diagonal. Black probably should just sack a knight, but after the queen drops back, white simply has 4 minor pieces. You're way ahead here and you're going to win the game. So black can't really play the c6 and b5. However, in this position after e3, black can play b5 guarding the pawn, because when you go a4 here, black can play b4, and now the knight's under attack, and after knight b1, black can play bishop a6 guarding the pawn. This is actually heavy theory, so I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, but nonetheless, you don't get this pawn on c4 cleanly. You have to fight to win the pawn back, and it becomes a very theoretical battle. So I did want to point that out. So if black were to take, you go a4, stopping b5. If black were to play a6 here, for example, you can simply go e3, and after b5 takes. Now you can play knight takes pawn, because if black were to capture the horse, you win this rook on the a8 square. So black can't really play a6. Normally what you're going to get is a move like bishop f5, and now after e3, black no longer has the b5 move, and after e6 and bishop takes c4, let's just say black goes bishop e7, you castle, and then you follow it up with queen to e2, playing for rook to d1 and pawn to e4 to build this white center. So that's how you go about it. We got bishop g4, bishop h5, and now I play queen b3. We got queen c7. Objectively, queen b6 would be the best move here, because now after pawn takes, and knight takes d5, material is even here. White is still substantially better after g4, bishop g6, takes, and this very strong move pawn to e4 with the idea of bishop b5 and very quick development. Again, this is going to get very theoretical, very tactical. I don't want to go too deep into this, but if you are an intermediate player and you're watching, say 2000, you're wondering, this g4 and e4 idea is extremely strong. All right, so my opponent played queen c7. I went here. We got knight d7, e5 only try. We got takes here, takes. Black probably should have played the move pawn takes pawn and g takes f6, but again, I would have simply played e3 followed by bishop e2 or bishop d3, castling the king. Actually, here maybe I don't want to castle, because say black were to go this way, if you get some position like this, castles would actually lose the game to bishop to f3, and then all of a sudden queen h3, and you're getting checkmated. So probably what I would recommend here with this open g file is simply to play bishop e2, because if black trades, you simply have 1 extra pawn, and if black plays a move like bishop to g6, you can simply castle to the queen side here, and white is doing very well. So we got takes, bishop h6, e3 takes, bishop b5, and alas, that's all she wrote. Kind of a little bit of an anticlimactic ending to this game, but that's how it goes. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this latest video in the speedrun series. This is going to do it for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something educational. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will continue with these speedrun videos. And I hope you enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.